And we're live. Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of the Wheelie Podcast. I'm your host, Micah Toll, and I'm joined again by Electrek Seth Weintraub. How's it going, Seth?
I'm good.
Awesome. And we have, as usual, a bunch of interesting electric bike and other micromobility related stories. Everything from a merger from Electric Bike Company to California continuing to crack down on e-bike hooligans. Speaking of, Super73 has issued a recall. We were seeing Cowboy moving its production back, sort of nearshoring it close to Belgium. We visited Bafang's factory in China, so we've got a fun behind the scenes look at that. And we're going to cover new electric microcar. So where are we going to start off this week, Seth?
All right. Electric Bike Company merges with Integral Electronics following Pedego partnership.
So this has been something we've been following for several months, at least on the Pedego side, which we'll get to. But even before that, we've just heard from Electric Bike Company, which is based out of Newport Beach, California, that they are merging with Integral Electrics, an electric bike brand that was founded in 2023 as a sort of female first e-bike company that was designed to represent an underrepresented component of the e-bike market. It was founded by Laura Belmar, who basically found that when she was trying to find a cargo e-bike, she just couldn't find any good fits for her to take her kids. And so she, having already been a serial entrepreneur, founded an electric bike company designing e-bikes sort of by women for women. So that was only about a year and a half ago, and they've had multiple popular models, including a really cool front trike. It's like a tadpole design, so it's got that big sort of tub in the front. And now they are merging with Electric Bike Company, who is famous for their Newport Beach-based assembly. And so it's an interesting partnership because Electric Bike Company continues being able to offer that like extreme level of customization because they build everything right there. But they're bringing in integrals, some of their people, as well as their designs for their cargo bikes and trikes. So those will now sort of come under the EBC branding, but it'll flesh out the offerings because Electric Bike Company, I mean, they've long been known for their cruisers, but their bikes aren't necessarily the best option for smaller riders. They do have a couple smaller frames, and they've offered 24-inch wheels instead of 26. I know when my wife and I visited a few years ago, they let us borrow some really cool bikes, and they made one that she got to borrow that had smaller wheels on a somewhat smaller, I think it was the Model Y frame, but still it was a bit big for her, and she's only like 160 centimeters. It's like 5'3", I think. So it's cool to see EBC merge with this company that's designing sort of like female friendly and small stature friendly bikes to flesh out their offering there. In addition, we've gotten confirmation from Pedego that a partnership that we reported on the early stages of it several months ago has actually come to fruition. So Pedego has entered a sort of a licensing deal with Electric Bike Company, where in all of Pedego's franchise stores now, you can order basically Pedego branded Electric Bike Company bikes. So these are still like built in Newport, and they use EBC's design wall. A lot of these franchises have the design wall installed, where it's this like massive touchscreen TV that you just like click and drag your bike parts and your colors, and if you want wood fenders or you want like black anodized bars, whatever, it's like you just build it right there on a screen in front of you, and you can do this in a Pedego shop, and then they build it and send it out as a like Pedego branded bike. In addition, I think both brands are working together on like service and support. So EBC already had like 250 dealers. Now they add 150 Pedego stores. So that's like 400 touch points across the US that they now share. So some big moves here between three different companies coming together in this in multiple partnership stages here. So this is pretty cool to see for the industry.
Yeah, we there was some kind of controversy when you kind of, I don't know if you broke the news. I think you did, on EBC and Pedego tie up. So that's officially happened, and now Integral's going to be part of that as well. It sounds like.
Yeah, so I got the confirmation from Pedego's CEO that like it's, signed, sealed, and delivered at this point. Um, when I never got like the total final story from when I initially broke it, but it appears everyone was on board on both sides except the CEO of Pedego at the time. He's now out, and the new CEO has rubber stamped it. So yeah, now it is official and like Pedego wide. So it seems like uh, any initial holdback is now gone. So it's cool to see that like come to fruition. The Integral Electrics merger is a separate thing. That's like a merger deal between Electric Bike Company and Integral, but it comes sort of like right on the heels of the Pedego partnership.
And do you think, I mean, sorry to keep going on the Pedego part because that's not really the announcement here today, but do you think Pedego will continue to, I want to say outsource their bikes, but like maybe look at other bike partnerships?
Um, it's hard to say. I mean, so remember this deal isn't like, replacing their existing inventory,
Right,
right? So they're still going to be, a lot of their popular models are still going to be on their shelves. It just adds to it with
right,
the EBC partnership. So we could see them create other interesting deals. I think one of the reasons they jumped on this though is because instead of, their normal sourcing from, I don't know, Taiwan or China or wherever they get their bikes, this gave them something unique, their ability to create like these very customized Pedego bikes.
right,
So I think compared to, joining up with any other bike company, they wouldn't get the same kind of advantages as what they found with this sort of unique opportunity with
right,
EBC. At the same time, all of these Pedego shops are franchises, so they're independently owned. And I know
right,
that, the Pedego shop in Boca that I often see, I think they've even got their own bike as well. Like, they sell Pedego, but I think they sort of have their own like locally sourced bike that they sell in addition. So, each Pedego shop can kind of do their own thing as well. And we've seen that also with, support and service. A lot of them will service any brand's bikes, not just Pedego. Some of them are a little more, keeping it within the family kind of thing. So they have some leeway from franchise to franchise.
yeah. I mean, it's a tough, it's like a tightrope to walk because on one hand, Pedego offers some like very high end bikes, but very high price points. But like the justification for those high price points was that part of that money would go to the brand and the fact and the stores and all the other stuff. But then we're starting to see at other dealerships, or sorry, other Pedego shops, these they're carrying rad bikes and all the kind of the lower cost, even electric bikes. um so which makes sense, obviously. Like, if you're going to a Pedego shop, you're probably not going to get out of there. I guess you could probably find $1,000 bike. Their Element, I guess, would be lower priced, but generally speaking, those bikes are more high end, more expensive bikes. By bringing in lower cost bikes, they're also kind of undercutting their own brand. And it's just an interesting situation, and I wonder how sustainable the model is because theoretically, other bikes are more competitive, but they don't have the overhead of having stores. So it's like one of those conundrums, I guess.
Yeah, and Pedagog's always found itself in a sort of interesting position. One being so early in the market. I mean,
Right.
they were one of the first e-bike companies in the US, and then having that unique franchise model has always put it in sort of this weird situation. But at the same
Yeah.
time, it gives it some freedom, like we've seen, with this EBC deal, etc. So I guess there are pros and cons there, but yeah, it does sort of require an evaluation of the value proposition.
Yep. All right, let's move on. California town seeks to criminalize wheelies on 75-mile-per-hour electric bikes. That seems reasonable at face value, but
yeah. And update they did. So
okay.
since this article posted a couple days later. So this is about Santa Barbara, a nice little California beach town that, like many California towns and increasingly many other towns across the U.S., has an issue with sort of like, we call them kind of e-bike hooligans. They're often, like teens or, young adults in their 20s that are riding either like high power electric bikes, or oftentimes they're these Surons or Talaria or other not even electric bicycles. They're electric sort of light dirt bikes, for lack of a better term. We often call them trail bikes, but they're essentially mini motorcycles. And you often see groups of them riding, blowing through red lights, stop signs, popping wheelies, etc. So Santa Barbara was having a city council measure to decide whether or not to enact a bunch of new ordinance changes, including outlawing popping wheelies, but many other sort of notes here, from requiring bikes to use a bike lane if it's there. So like if there's a bike lane, you can't be riding in the street, to requiring single file riding, with the exception of in a few areas allowing like riding two abreast. There's let's see, giving right of way to pedestrians, which seems pretty reasonable. Basically, a whole bunch of new ordinances, and this came up in a meeting earlier this week, and it did pass. So all of these new things are now law in Santa Barbara, and it's sort of a looking glass into the larger debate around the popularity of electric bikes, and especially higher power, faster electric bikes and vehicles that technically are not electric bicycles under the law, because California is always sort of led in the e-bike space, first just in adoption, but as the numbers went higher, we started seeing a lot of the associated issues that come with higher e-bike adoption rates, especially among younger riders. And so this crackdown that we're seeing in California, which this is just one case in Santa Barbara, but it's followed several laws both statewide and in other cities, is very emblematic of a movement against sort of misuse of electric bikes, and especially what we would consider non-street legal e-bikes or even light electric motorcycles. So I'm not at all surprised to see this. We've known this would be coming for years, and it does seem like 2025 is sort of the crackdown year. Not that there hasn't been efforts in the past, but this is the year where a lot of these laws are starting to make it onto the books. It's almost like there's this ironically critical mass of laws coming out now, and sort of people supporting them to be able to actually put these things on the books. I know this is always a touchy subject, Seth. I think outlawing wheelies on 75-mile-an-hour e-bikes might be a little more cut and dry, but I know when we get into the stronger regulation of these e-bikes and exactly which e-bikes and what types of riding are permitted is a bit touchy. But I'm curious your thoughts here.
Yeah, I mean, where do you draw the line, I guess? And like, does it, can I do a wheelie on my Schwinn? Like, can I do a wheelie on an electric Schwinn? Can I do a wheelie on a class 3 electric Schwinn? Like, I don't know. I mean, I know why. Like, nobody likes to see some hooligan or some 51-year-old either driving down the road doing a wheelie. It's not fun for anybody. They don't want to see an accident. It looks scary. They don't want to get hit. They don't want to have to swerve. They don't want people looking at that person to hit somebody else. There's lots of wheelies are probably better done at home or on trails or off public streets. Sidewalks also, like, not a good place to ride a bike. I really don't enjoy when I'm a pedestrian. This is a problem in Japan, actually. There are a lot of bikers that just rode on sidewalks all the time, which is very strange. And it's not that they're going to hit you necessarily, but you just have to use that extra mental energy to kind of, there's this fast thing operating where you're supposed to be, very casually strolling along. So you have to use your brain and your threat detection kind of a lot. So like I get all these things, the ability to enforce them, all this other stuff. That's where the devil in the details comes. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
hard for me to kind of parse this really.
And I think, a lot of us, we see this happening, and the obvious answer is, all right, just give us better infrastructure, right? Like, if you don't
Yeah.
want bikes mixing with pedestrians, give us bike lanes. If you don't want, bikes mixing with cars and riding two abreast, give us bike lanes, and to its credit, California has done a great job in many areas and many cities of putting in better cycling infrastructure. But, it's cheap to make laws, it's expensive to make protected bike lanes.
Right.
But if we invest in these things, then we're not only investing in, like the quality of our cities, but we're investing in the safety of our citizens. So I think that long-term planning has to involve, this, what we're seeing as not just a fad, but like a growing real trend of switching away from cars into other smaller, micromobility vehicles, whether that's bikes, scooters, whatever.
Yeah. And as a biker, like e-biker, I don't think most e-bikers want a 75 mile per hour Suron doing a wheelie in the bike lane either. So, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know where those things belong. Like,
Yeah.
get off
On
my
fire
lawn.
roads, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Not too far though. Good segue to popular Super 73 e-bikes recalled for brake failure.
Yeah, so this is two models of Super 73's bikes that have an issue with their brake calipers that are being recalled. It's the Super 73Z, the Miami edition, and I think it's the Adventure something. I forgot off the top of my head, but you'll scroll down
Venture
there.
Core, yeah.
Yeah, the Adventure Core. So two different models. If you have either of these, you should check to see if they're within the recall. There's a website here in the article that you can use to check, or if you just Google Super 73 recall, you'll probably find it. But it relates to the brake calipers, front and rear, on both of these models. This is something that we've seen, not just from Super 73. It's quite common in the e-bike industry. Electrek last year, or maybe 2 years ago now, had a brake recall. Rad had a big tire recall on the Radwagon 4. And this happens a lot because these electric bike companies, they don't make a lot of these subcomponents, right? They don't make their own tires, they don't make their own brakes, that sort of thing. So they're totally reliant on the quality of these components coming out of the factories that supply these components to their assembly factories. Now, you would hope that there's some very thorough quality control going on when these components come in. It's something we'll talk about when we get to the Bafang story in a few minutes. That generally, whenever these subcomponents come in, a certain number of them are supposed to be examined to make sure that everything complies. And then once that's confirmed, everything can go into assembly. In this case, it appears that something was missed. There are a lot of very small components in these brake calipers. In this case, it was a tiny little retaining pin was the issue. So while I get that things can be missed, the whole point of these quality checks is so that things are not missed. So this is certainly an unfortunate one, but it does seem like Super 73 is being fairly proactive here. They've got a kit that they can send out to anyone that's affected, so they can just replace their entire brake caliper. It's not terribly complicated. Most people that are fairly comfortable assembling like IKEA furniture, turning like an Allen key, can do it. But Super 73 is also giving a $50 reimbursement to have a local shop do it. Based on what I've seen some bike shops charge, I'm not sure that would cover the work of replacing bike calipers, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of people should be able to handle this pretty well themselves. And because they're hydraulic, it doesn't really take too much adjustment. Like, I imagine they'll ship it with a brake lever, so you don't even need to bleed it or anything. You literally just bolt it on. It's not like mechanical brakes where you'd have to like run the cable and adjust it and tune it, kind of thing. So
Mhm.
should be fairly easy, and it's good to see that Super 73 is being fairly proactive here, especially since as we've talked about before, they've got a lot of young riders, and you don't want to see kids on bikes without brakes.
For sure. I mean, I guess it's one of the nice things about bikes in general is that the brakes are redundant. There's usually front and rear brakes, so like the chances of both going bad at the same time are pretty low. So you don't want to be braking with your front brake only going fast, or just surprisingly losing half your brakes, but you're still in pretty good shape. And it's also, I guess this is a good rationale for going with a company like Super73 versus a fly-by-night drop shipper that may or not be in business when the brake when you realize the brakes aren't being put together well, or they might be out of business, they might not care, they might whatever. So this is like one of those reasons why you buy a e-bike from a name brand e-bike company.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Because when you get one of these like Amazon bikes, you're certainly going to save a couple $100, but like at what cost?
Right. And that's one of the reasons that I certainly prefer to buy these kind of bikes. All right, let's move on. Cowboy, moving its electric bike production back home, almost
home. So Cowboy is a Belgian-based electric bike maker. They're very popular across Europe, and they make sort of these new take on a classic sort of Dutch-ish designed e-bike, very much in the commuting space. They had been producing, I believe, in Taiwan, but now they're joining a small but growing movement of nearshoring bike production. In this case, they've moved production to France, which is right across the border from them there, so that they've got much closer manufacturing. They have better quality control, ability to watch these bikes being built, but also importantly these days in an environment of increasing tariffs, not just in the US, around the world. Europe has its own tariff issues. By producing bikes locally, they're sidestepping any current or future concerns or uncertainty around these tariffs. In the US, a lot of companies are looking at this idea of either nearshoring. At a certain point, some companies were moving production to Mexico. Similar idea. Find local-ish manufacturing that's maybe one country away that can be done more affordably than where you are. I imagine Belgian manufacturing would be pretty expensive. Actually, when we were talking about Integral Electrics and Electric Bike Company merging, Integral did their manufacturing in Mexico. So, another good example of companies looking into that. Though at this point, now it's looking like Mexico and Canada are not necessarily safe from tariffs as well. So at least for the U.S., that is. Europe doesn't have to worry about that. But this is a great example of this slowly increasing movement of nearshoring bike manufacturing. For U.S. companies, with the exception of Electric Bike Company and a few others, very few are actually considering U.S. production. But we have seen a shift out of China to countries like Vietnam is a big one for manufacturing. I'm actually looking into setting up a similar sort of a China tour, like I've done a couple times, but to go to Vietnam and take a look at the growing bike production scene in Vietnam that's sort of taken what has been built in China and trying to create like the new generation of bike production there. So this is sort of the European version of that, though I think that getting this close to home definitely has some bigger advantages for Cowboy than just like a lot of the US companies which are moving out of China and going like to Vietnam or Cambodia or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is kind of a growing trend globally, is like we don't trust the global supply chain as much, and are trying to make things as close as possible to home, so that it seems like there's going to be a tariff war everywhere coming. I mean, that's what it feels like. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but there's a lot of protectionist stuff against China. There's a lot of stuff coming out of the US now. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this seems to be the current trend for this year, is sort of rethinking where manufacturing is. A lot of this actually started last year, when the writing was on the wall, but now we're seeing a lot of the moves taking place.
Yep. I mean, in a way, it's good. Like, you do want your stuff to be built closer to where you're selling, but on the other hand, the economics of scale don't work quite as well when you have a lot of disparate, smaller manufacturing. You don't have the same supply chains and all the other stuff, but maybe that's good to have that global redundancy.
Right.
I always thought it was funny that Cowboy is a Belgian company. Like, you don't think of Belgian cowboys very often.
Yeah. And I think while they do have some presence in the US, like they're a very European brand, like that's their absolutely their main market. So it is pretty funny.
It's amusing. All right, let's move on. Speaking of China, I went back to Bafang's factory in China 5 years later. The difference is mind blowing.
Yeah, this was a fun one. This is the second in a series of videos that I'll be posting probably over the next month or so on a visit I took to China. This one we went to Bafang or Bafang, depending how you pronounce it, to their factory. And for me, this was my second time visiting their factory, though this was a new factory. I went in 2019, just before the pandemic, and the difference in what I experienced this time was quite interesting. From increased automation to improved safety and focus on the health of workers, even just like the sort of social aspect of workers. Like at one point, I saw these pictures on the wall in part of the factory, and I stopped and I asked my guide about it. And he was like, "Oh yeah, this is like a barbecue that like this section took together. This is like a field day where these like the motor section went out and they did like all these games in the park." And it was just cool to see that kind of stuff. But to give you sort of a summary of what I saw in this trip here, so I started in the R&D section, which actually I guess I started in the showroom here. That's what you're seeing is where I got a chance to look at all of these new designs. What you're seeing here is their internally geared hub with a motor built in, so it's got multiple speeds, like like a traditional sort of like Dutch hub, but with a hub motor. Then we moved into the R&D section. That's where all these Bafang engineers are designing and creating and sort of dreaming up the next generation of their designs. When I was here 5 years ago, some of them were sort of like dropping hints about improved transmissions, which at the time was a big deal because I know, Seth, you've experienced this. A lot of mid drives were just like ripping out chains and derailleurs and gears. So I think that led to what we're seeing there with this GVT Bafang's own sort of internally made, internally geared hubs. From there, I moved to the production line, and that's where we got to see how these different products are made, from the motors, which there are still some like manual labor steps on the line, but we saw a lot more automation, a lot of machines that assemble the gears, that assemble the motor shells, align everything, that sort of thing. So it's sort of like a mixture of manual and automated manufacturing now. We also got to see the battery factory, which was really interesting because Bafang has grown so big that at this point they're making their own batteries. And that's a huge step for the bike industry because battery factories have always been separate. Like you buy your motor, you buy your drive system, and then you go to a different supplier and you get your batteries. But with Bafang getting into the battery game, it means that OEMs, bike manufacturers, can actually get complete systems that are designed to talk to each other right from the factory. And I talked to some of the engineers, and you can see they have a real emphasis on safety here, which is important because we talk about battery safety, fire safety, that sort of thing all the time. And so you can see, they have these huge testing rooms. All of the cells that come in get tested before they go into a battery. The production is very much automated. It's machines doing all of the battery cell sorting, It's machines doing all the battery cell welding and the assembly, and then humans do like the last final steps, like putting the screws in the case kind of thing. Here you can see like the vibration testing. They have these big drop machines to just simulate like if you were to take your battery out of your bike and then drop it, you know, and then do that 1,000 times, what would happen, kind of thing. So it's really cool to see how much goes into this, and then of course the final batteries get tested as a complete pack before they even leave the factory. So they all get cycled. There's like this massive hallway with just like thousands of batteries running through their first cycle before packaging. So just really fascinating to see all of this happening, especially comparing it to what was still a big company 5 years ago, but a much smaller footprint than what they have today, and with much better technology today. Here you can see the electromagnetic compatibility testing room. So they're testing to make sure that there's no like EMF interference from any of their components. That's also how they can get their compliance, because they're certified to do compliance testing there. Same with the batteries, I believe they're certified to do compliance testing. So just the scale of this operation now is kind of mind blowing. Bafang is the biggest drivetrain manufacturer in Asia, so that's not surprising, but it's still like until you walk in and like look around, it kind of baffles how much is going on there, and just how many people are responsible for the parts that end up on your bike.
Yeah, it's super cool to go behind the scenes there. I mean, you mentioned the biggest in Asia. I would imagine probably the biggest in the world, unless Bosch is still on top there. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question. In terms of bike drives, they may produce more than Bosch. I mean, Bosch also has a huge moped and
Right.
scooter division, and all, of course, all the other stuff, cars and whatnot. But yeah, it'd be interesting to like break out the numbers and see if Bafang does more bike motors.
Yeah, nobody really is very transparent with their numbers on that stuff, but Bafang is certainly one that we see quite a bit around. And I feel like maybe a decade ago or something, even more recent, Bafang kind of seemed like just a generic Chinese motor brand that just like, you wouldn't imagine like all this kind of testing stuff going on behind the scenes. But they've kind of taken their lead and taken their resources and kind of up their game. And I don't know what it looks like at Bosch, but I imagine that this is getting to the same quality control level that we're seeing at Bosch and Rosa and the Japanese manufacturers as well, Yamaha, Shimano.
Yeah, it'd
So
be interesting to ask someone at Bosch. I'm sure they would,
yeah,
like to say that there's a difference, but it would be interesting to compare.
yeah, and I think Bosch is making a lot of their stuff in China now, and I know their battery packs are outsourcing as well. So maybe there isn't that much difference at this point. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if you want to invite us into your factories, Bosch, we're happy to bring a camera and take a look around.
Totally. All right, last story. NIU unveils electric microcar with impressive $8,300 price target. And if people listening want to add some comments or get some questions asked, we see 4 or 5 in there already. But now's your chance before we go to the last story. But what do you think about NIU's new car?
Yeah, this thing is just like this can do no wrong in my opinion. I love microcars. In this case, because NIU is designing this for the European market, this is meant to fit into the L6E quadricycle laws. So it's
Oh, really? It's
yeah,
quadricycle. This kind of looked like a smart car to me.
yeah. So it's so technically it only has a 28 mile per hour speed limit because it fits into the L6E quadricycle. The L7E is the heavy quadricycle that can go up to like 50 or 60 miles an hour. I think it's like 90 kilometers per hour, if I'm not mistaken. This is the smaller of the two, or at least the lower power of the two. So, you got to sort of consider this in its element, right? This is not a car. It's in Europe, what we call a quadricycle. And it's lower power. So, it's a 5 kilowatt motor, I believe it's the same motor used in their NQI X scooter. Same batteries as well if you get the removable battery version. So it's 10 kilowatts of peak power. And then with the two different battery options, there's the larger size is 7 kilowatt hours, which they say gives you 181 kilometers, which is, I believe is something like 110 miles of range. But that's the fixed battery. So if you want the removable batteries, it's like a third of the size, and you get something like 60 kilometers or 37 miles of range. But the advantage is if, like, let's say you live in New York City, or more likely like Paris or something, which is where this will be, and you live in an apartment, that you got to walk up 3 stories and you have no charging on the street, you could actually have this car and still charge your batteries. Take that tiny little retrofit elevator in the middle of your staircase up to your apartment, and
You've been to Paris, it sounds like.
yeah, I've stayed in an Airbnb or two with a scary elevator.
Yeah.
um, and so that's the idea, is that these are very urban centric. It's a two-seater. It only goes 28 miles per hour, but it feels and looks largely like a car.
Like a smart car.
And exactly, yeah. Like for someone who doesn't feel comfortable riding a motorcycle or a scooter, which is New's main products, this gives you a lot of the advantages. You can park in a tiny area. It's very fuel efficient, etc. You don't even need a car driver's license in many countries in Europe. You can just have a moped license. So it
Yeah, the
gives you a lot
parking
of
is
that.
interesting with the short stature of these. Even smart cars could do this in Paris and some other European cities. They do what's called perpendicular parking, where instead of parallel parking, they just like pull right in sideways, and the car is only as long as most cars are wide. So it's a
Yeah.
nice feature.
Yeah, and in the Netherlands, especially like in Amsterdam, where those little tiny cars are quite popular, lots of times people just park them on the sidewalk. Like I don't know how legal that is. I
Yeah.
don't know what the regulations are, but like you see them all the time because
Yep.
they're barely bigger than like a mobility scooter, and they're
Right.
just roll up like a bicycle on the sidewalk and park right there.
Yep.
So there's a lot of convenience here, but at the same time, you get the advantages of a car. So like if it's raining, you're dry. In the winter, it has a heater. There's an optional AC. So like there are advantages. If you get in a fender bender, like it bends your fender and not your knee. So like there
Yeah. I don't know if I
are.
would want to take a real 28-mile-per-hour crash on one of these, but yes, I agree.
Well, would you rather take it on a moped?
That's right.
So
You want to
like
be you want to be thrown clear of it, hopefully.
yeah, so there are certain advantages that come from both the scooter and the car world that I absolutely see here. And then the last one is the price. Now, this is a prototype. It was only unveiled yesterday, I believe. But the company is targeting 8,000 euros as the price, about 8,300 US dollars, which is, I think, fairly reasonable. There's not a lot to compare out there. Like the Citroen Ami is kind of the poster child of the successful quadricycle in Europe. They've sold like 30,000 of those. We did a review of one of those a year or two ago. My wife and I rented one on vacation, and like super awesome, right? So like I'm already a big fan of quadricycles. But if New can do it and bring in the same technology that they've already proven on literally millions of motorcycles and scooters, then that's just going to increase, the durability, the reliability, everything that goes along with this, as opposed to, like in Citroen's case, having to sort of develop a drivetrain from the ground up. So to me, this is just a really cool opportunity. It's not a product yet. I hope that they bring this to production. From talking to some folks at New, it sounds like they're pretty serious about this. It's not just like a show thing. They really want to produce this and like have a Citroen Ami competitor. So fingers are crossed that they're able to pull through and bring this thing to market, because I would drive one of these in like a tiny little alleyway European city in a heartbeat.
It's interesting though, like where does this at $8,000 or 8,000 euros, where does this compare or how is this better than a Citroen Ami, which I think is a similar price and being built by a car company, I feel like there's a little bit more faith in its, robustness, I guess.
Well, you could certainly make an argument either way. Now the Ami, having used one for a week. I can tell you the charging is a bit of an issue. Like if
Hmm.
you have a private garage, it's fine because it just charges kind of like an electric bike where the charger's built in. So it charges
Right.
off a normal like 220-volt extension cord. Or like if you're in the US, it'd be like a normal 120 volts. You don't need
Yeah.
a car charger. In fact, you can't use a car charger, which was a problem for me.
Okay.
And so if you have removable batteries like the new version, it totally solves that problem. Um, if I don't know what kind of charging port new is going to put on the fixed battery version. I really hope that it's like a type 2 like normal European charger, because if they go with like a wall plug for level 1 charging, it's going to have the same problem as the Ami, which is like terribly inconvenient for anyone that doesn't have their own private garage. So
Right.
that is already what I think a main advantage over the Ami. But then when it comes to like reliability, I could see the argument going either way. Like Citroen is a car company, but this was like a ground up design as
Hmm.
opposed to new already uses these motors. They already use their controllers, their batteries, etc. And so like they just put them on a four-wheeler instead of a two-wheeler kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the removable batteries is certainly an advantage. And hopefully, you mentioned how is this going to charge? Hopefully, there's more than one option. Maybe you can charge, via typical car charger, or maybe there's just a, bring your own. Maybe there's just like, an outlet, whatever. I mean, you could even throw a couple solar panels on this thing. And
Yeah, yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
Micah, this might be your solar car here.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, another advantage I just realized, by the way, I forgot how little storage there is in the Ami. The only
uh-huh.
storage is in front of the passenger, whereas this one you have some real behind the seat storage. Now it's not huge, but it's there. With
It
the
actually
Ami,
looks
yeah,
notable.
like I think you could put at least two like carry-on sized trolley suitcases. Whereas in the Ami, there was space for one carry-on trolley in front of the passenger's feet, and then behind the driver, if they're a shorter driver and they scoot the seat forward, you've
Right.
got a few inches of space, which we actually used because I'm not like a tall person. But if you're taller and you scoot the seat all the way back, like you're up against the back wall of the car. So there's definitely more storage space here.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how tall you are. Does it have a
Yeah.
sunroof? You can stick your head out if you're a little bit tall, on the taller side.
One cool thing, speaking of that, well, there is an option for a sunroof, but the rear windshield is
Uh-huh.
electric and goes down, just like the windows, which I don't think I've ever seen before.
Oh yeah, I see that.
Yeah, occasionally, like I think if I'm not mistaken, the Microlino one lifts up, or maybe it's just a hatch, like a sort of weird mini hatchback. But I don't think I've ever seen like a retracting rear windshield.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also,
Yeah,
those
so
seats look very, very cozy here.
yeah, definitely cozier than the Ami. The Ami was like race seats from the 60s.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this looks like your armrest is your passenger's leg.
Yeah, there were a couple like show pictures I saw of two people sitting in it, and like you're very much shoulder to shoulder. So
Right. Yeah,
like
and
two
hopefully you or your partner doesn't have broad shoulders, because then you're out the window or something.
yeah, yeah, two broad shoulder dudes in there would be like shoulder to shoulder and shoulder to glass.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we love to see it. Like, typically this would be a single passenger kind of situation, but and we're just, joking around about usability issues, but these would make cities much better and quieter and easier to deal with. So hopefully these pick up, and more companies start building these. So
Yeah.
let's hit the comments here. EBC making moves, according to Random Dude, and he said that first. I guess he probably echoed that. Pix Electric says maybe our political discourse in the U.S. will open voters' eyes on how globalization works and bring back manufacturing pride to the U.S. Yes, Seth, I agree with you on the economics of scale. You hope. I mean, I don't know that these tariffs and stuff are coming from a good place, but you hope that there is some sort of sorry about that. You hope that some good comes out of all of this. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know that it's a lack of manufacturing pride because if anything, like I see a lot of people that, have this like, oh, buy American mentality, and then like, their phone's made in China and their computer's made in China and everything. So like I don't think it's a lack of pride. There are people that, would be very proud to buy American and don't. I think it's a lack of local skilled labor or opportunities. Like we just don't know how to build bikes like the Taiwanese. Like,
Yeah,
that skill is over there because they're experts at it.
right. And then, it's not portable. You can't just bring some experts that have a whole supply chain to deal with. And that's a lot of experts and a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Michael Sprinzella says, I'll miss the aftermarket upgrades for Bafang with a new CAN bus setup, but for the mass market, I'm glad to see the upgraded safety and affordable kits. Yeah, so that's I guess one of the things of going up market is you're less DIY friendly.
Yeah. So, you know, you could see this from either side. Like it's a double-edged sword, right? On the one hand, having that like CAN bus protocol and the ability for the battery and the control and everything to talk to each other, it does add the opportunity for increased safety features. On the other hand, it limits our abilities as tinkerers to do our own sort of custom things, which used to be for, sort of a dumb battery, you could do a lot of that stuff. And so I certainly understand Michael's sentiments here, but it's not like this is. I hope at least that it's not being done, maliciously to control, what we can do. I hope that it's being done with the intention of giving us better safety and more features, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's what we all hope for, right? But there is always that DIY component, and there's other options there. Um, all right, Pix Electric. I'm just blown away by China's progress on manufacturing, technology, and innovation. The U.S. is regressing, and I'm sure they're laughing at us. I'm sure there's some chuckles over there. It does seem like we're regressing, but hopefully this is all a wake-up call. Hopefully.
Yeah, or maybe they're not even like paying that much attention to the U.S. Like maybe that's our like ego that's like, oh, they're probably looking at us and laughing, and they're not. They're just doing their
We're not
thing
even
with their
thinking,
heads down.
not even
Yeah,
thinking about you. You're like just one of 183 markets.
exactly. Yeah. Oh, North America, we're considering them. Yes.
All right. Bafang may not have been as upscale as European competition, but they have always been quality. I would agree with that mostly. I kind of feel like maybe not, at least in the early days, maybe not as high quality as Bosch or Broza, although, Broza has their own, belt issues and Bosch has some issues as well. So nobody's perfect there.
Yeah, I think I mean Bafang has always been quite good. That's very true, especially compared to their contemporaries in China.
Yeah.
But in the last few years, they've made a lot of great improvements on top of what was already a good foundation, improvements in waterproofing, that sort of thing, that have just, lots of small quality things that add up to make, a much nicer product. So they've always been quite good, definitely. But now they've really upped the game even more, I would say.
Yep. All right. Micro mobility cars will be a long time coming in New York City. We haven't legalized anything that's small yet. It's a shame because those things would really help out in New York City. We have, I'm not in New York right now. I'm out in Bromley, but in Vermont. But in New York City, they're doing congestion pricing, and a lot of people are finding that's really great. Like the lowering of traffic has been kind of like a bright spot. And for me, like I don't typically drive to New York City anyway, but even like driving to the airport, which is kind of near New York City, um, there's a lot less traffic just going in and out of there. And you remove a bunch of traffic, and people can, the micro mobility cars would be an amazing way to get around town, and the weather and the rain and the snow and all the other stuff. So I think it would be fantastic. What do you think?
Yeah, well, there even are a couple of small options that are legal now, not super well known. One is the Gem, which is available and legal in New York. Another is Wink Motors, which we tested a couple of years ago in New York City. And so there are, options out there. I took a Wink from Brooklyn to Manhattan across the Brooklyn Bridge, and like it was, a great little get around New York City vehicle, 25 miles an hour. Rarely did traffic allow me to go faster. The Brooklyn Bridge was probably the one area where it was like, I was trying to push that pedal through the floor kind of thing. But I agree that, it's a great city for it just because of the congestion, the average lower speed, and the ability to wiggle around. I mean, there were so many places that like I could have just wiggled around cars if it had been legal to do so. Like that's how small and nimble these things are. And like I kept looking at the spaces on the side, like, oh, if I was on a bike, I'd just go there.
Yep. You can't lane split with these cars, at least not yet anyway. But it'd be nice, like maybe there's a market for, like small car lanes or like streets that only small cars could go on. I feel like that would be a really big motivator for that kind of stuff. I mean, parking alone would be a huge motivation. And we've talked about smart cars GEMs in the past, which I think are now owned by Polaris, and they're great-ish vehicles, but the value prop, I mean, they're just so expensive for what you get. They're they cost as much as like a Chevy Bolt, and it's
Oh yeah, or more. Yeah. They're I think Polaris sold them, and now they're owned by Wave, if I'm not mistaken. But
oh
yeah, I
really?
mean they're very well made, but they're like you said, I mean they're crazy expensive. The cheapest ones don't even have lithium batteries, and those are already expensive. But the lithium battery add-on is like $8,000 or $9,000. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. All right, I'd go for that Neo car, except I need at least 40 miles per hour to keep up with traffic going to work and back. The vehicle looks very nice. I like the steering wheel instead of the bike motorcycle steering. Yeah, if you need 40 miles per hour, these bikes are not only, or sorry, these cars are not only not your car because they don't have the power, but also they're probably not safe enough to withstand a 40 mile per hour collision or whatever. At 40 miles per hour, you're probably either going to want to stick with a motorcycle type vehicle or just a, I don't know, what do you think, like
That's an interesting
cheap
question.
vehicle or...
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, when you present that, like, let's say you told me it went 40. Now I'm asking myself, would I want to go 40 in this vehicle? And then you get into the issue that I see with small motorcycles all the time. Whenever I cover one of these like mini motorcycles or even like the high powered electric bikes, is people always want like 5 or 10 more miles an hour because
oh
they don't look at what it can do. They look at what it can't do, like what it can almost do but can't. So like in this case, you're like, okay, so it goes 25. And I get what Ray's saying. Like, if it went 40, then that would work for my local roads. But if I gave you one that went 40, a lot of people would say, like, okay, but like if it only went 50 or 55, I could take it on my like urban highways. So like whatever speed you have, I feel like the first thing people see in the back of their mind is like, what does that speed limit me to not being able to do? So you like, I could play the like if it only went 10 miles an hour faster game until it's going 90 miles an hour and it's got the wall thickness of a shoebox. So I think at a certain point we gotta stop playing that game and accept the limits of what a microcar or a quadricycle is. Like you're not going to be building a 40-mile-an-hour version of these things and expect it to have the kind of safety that a real car has, or the nimbleness of a moped, that sort of thing. Now in Europe, they've done a good job with the L7E category, which can go like 50 miles an hour, but those are a much larger step up in terms of construction and safety compared to these sort of neighborhood electric vehicles that we have in the US. Like a Microlino can do, I think, over 50 miles an hour, but it's produced like a car. Like its body is like a monocoque produced in like an automobile factory. It's not a welded steel tube frame kind of thing, like a golf cart.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I would want to take a turn at 40 miles per hour with those, the narrow wheelbase on those vehicles. I think they might tip over pretty easily.
Yeah.
All right, how heavy are the removable batteries in the NIU? Could be game changing if they aren't too heavy to carry home. are they similar to the scooters or?
Yeah, so the removable ones are the same batteries out of the NQI X, and I'm not sure how much those specific ones weigh. My new has fairly large, it's like 2.1 kilowatt hour batteries, and I think they each weigh somewhere around 25 to almost 30 pounds, maybe the high 20s. So they're, heavy but doable for most people. Um, if anything, like having two is almost better because you're not walking with like a super lopsided, like 28-pound weight on one side. Um, but then like you're walking from the parking garage to the elevator with like almost 60 pounds of battery in your hands. There's not a lot of room left for the grocery bags kind of thing.
Yeah. All right. Toyota 4Runner rear windows roll down, and also old wagons had that rear window feature. I do remember riding in the third row, facing backwards, and a friend's parents' station wagon, and we were dying of like heat or whatever, and they tried to roll down the window, but it was electric and it had broken. So I do remember that in my head that exists. So. Yeah, it exists. I guess the 4Runner has that, and probably a bunch of other. Fat Freddy's cat says, "Thanks for doing these shows, Fat Freddy, and everybody else. Make sure you tell your friends, subscribe, and all that stuff. We appreciate it." LOL, no good is going to come from this clown. I believe he's referring to our current president in the U.S. And Michael Spinzella says, "I didn't mean to suggest Malice by Bafang. I'm glad to see safer, affordable kits going out to the masses." Yeah, I think we can all agree with that. Other than the motor, I upgraded my Bafang motors, have run flawlessly. I have a BBS 02 since 2017. Wow, that's almost 10 years old now. Coming up on 8 years, I guess. That's a long time for an e-bike motor.
Yeah.
Congestion pricing has definitely worked. I hope they outlive the Tangerine Palpatine. Oh, that's a new one. I don't think I've heard.
I haven't heard that either. That's good.
That one. And love the Fat Freddy reference. Or what are we talking? Fat Freddy? Is that a cartoon character or?
And I went over my head as well. I'll have to look it up.
All right, we're gonna go Google that after the show. That's all for the comments.
All right. Thank you guys, everyone, for tuning in. We'll be back here in another 2 weeks for the next episode of the Wheelie Podcast. See you next time, everyone.